Lindsay Adler here, and I'm back with another week of photo critiques, again focusing on color gel photography. Now the photos that I've selected, there were many that were submitted. I've chosen them because I found that there's something teachable, something I could share from these photographs. And so don't take it if you were included or not included to mean that the photos were good or bad. It's not. The photos I've selected had something important that I wanted to draw attention to. Now, by the way, if you love color gel photography, if this intrigues you, I have a tutorial called The Magic of Gels. It is a 3-hour video tutorial, and it also has a companion guide with 35 different color gel lighting setups. So if you like this style, you want to dive in more, be sure to check that out. Now with that being said, let's dive in and take a look at these critiques. I wanted to start with this image because it is right up my alley. I love it. The makeup is beautiful, the styling is beautiful, the location, like I love that wallpaper behind her in the chair, the color palette. It's just a really beautiful, well-constructed, well-conceived image. That being said, there are a couple things that I do think would make it an even more powerful shot. One of the things I found to be slightly distracting is that you can see on the right-hand side of the frame, there is a light that is blue filling in the shadows. Now it looks beautiful up here on the face. It's just a kiss of color. It unites the color of her eye makeup with her skin. But then towards the bottom of the frame here on the leg, it is so bright that it becomes a distraction. And when you look at the frame, I do look at her face first, but eventually I end back down on the leg. And the reason being was likely that the light was on the floor. And so yes, it filled in on her face, but it also was much closer to the leg and therefore brighter, inverse square law. So I think that if that light on the floor could have been elevated, perhaps a little bit more even to both the leg and the face, that would have been an improvement. And speaking of the leg, one other thing I think in posing wise is that right now it's stepped out in front of the chair, which I get it, because then otherwise, the bottom part of her body would be hidden. It makes her more dominant in the frame. But it's also such a straight line that I think if you look, there's a nice curve with her arm here and her hip, but just the bottom half of the body is so flat. So if there was a way to pose her perhaps with this knee kicked over just a little bit to the side, what it would do is it would introduce a nice curve with her hip and her thigh, and then maybe you'd see the edge of the heel. I think that would make it a little bit more elegant. And if I'm going to be crazy out of control nitpicky, ideally that thumb would be a little bit more relaxed, but don't worry. I didn't notice that until I looked at the photo for quite a long time before I actually saw that detail. But again, I love this shot. It was a great place to start because it is so well done. The lighting is beautiful. The color palette's beautiful. So bravo and nice job on the photograph. Okay, next up. So when I saw this photo, the first thing I thought was, whoa, like it was just overload of the senses. And the reason it was overload was because there's so much color and there's detail and there's styling. And then I actually thought, oh, okay, cool. I could see what's going on here. It's kind of acid trip, kind of hedonistic pleasure of the senses, like that kind of feel going on. But then I made myself come back around and I felt a little bit back in the whoa feeling again. So, okay, so what does that really mean to you? I actually think the colors work well here for what I think you're trying to achieve, especially with so much going on with eye makeup and the styling in the hair and the neck piece. I do think if you went crazy, going crazy with the light does add to it. But there's two things that I think pull away from the success. One of the things is that you're obviously using, on the right-hand side of the frame, over here, you're obviously using a orange gel. The problem I thought is that the ear does stick out quite a bit because the front of it isn't orange. And then the orange gel also hits the nose. It just happens to be the angle of that light. And so I think if the orange weren't on the nose, it would actually be more effective for me because I just keep looking back at her nose and that's not where I should be looking. The other thing is, I think there's so much attention paid to details in the rest of the photo, but this cherry, it looks dead and black. And I think with all the other colors that are going on here, you need a bright red cherry or something going into her mouth that is like a really bright saturated color that would pop, because you are drawn to her expression. You are drawn to this sensual moment. But then there's this dark, deadish cherry. I think that makes the picture fall a little bit flat. But I will applaud you for sure on being able to make a photo work overall that has so much going on. It's really hard to do that. Usually it fails, and you did a nice job making the colors make sense. Okay, next up. The styling in this is so cool. It's really well thought out. The model's very, very striking. I like the colors in the peacock that matches her dress, which matches a little bit of the color in the background. Now, since I am critiquing gels here, I can't entirely tell what gels you used or where. And usually I'm really good at this. And the reason I think is if you look at the catch lights, you can actually tell that there's 2 lights, and they're mostly centered in front of her. And so what that means is one light is white. I can tell that, right? One regular main light. And then the second light probably had a gel, but what happens is it got washed out by the main light. And so I can't really tell. And it creates light that's very flat, doesn't have a lot of directionality. It also doesn't direct my eye in the frame. Like I feel like as I look at this, I look at her face, but then I make it down to her arm quite a bit. I think it should be brighter on her face. If you're using gels, use it more purposefully. Maybe you're using a teal gel. Like maybe I think that's what you're using, but I would want to see it more in the shadows. And if you've taken my gel class, you know that gels show up most in shadow areas. So the main light needs to create those shadow areas for the gel to show up. So long story short, what you're working with is beautiful. You did a really nice job there. It just fell flat with the lighting. Everything else I think is quite nice. So let me show you real quick what I did in Photoshop just to, I think, push it in the direction you were going for a little bit more. I kind of went there with a color grade, and you might hate it. Let me just show you what I was thinking. Ideally, you would have gotten closer to this perhaps in camera, but what I did is I thought that her skin tone, it just looked kind of muddy and warm, but magenta, like it just wasn't right. So I desaturated the photo overall, and then I added contrast. And I already mentioned one of my favorite ways to add contrast is to use a black and white layer, adjustment layer on a blend mode of soft light. And at 100%, it was a little bit too strong, so I backed off of it. And then what I did is I went in and I added some blue and cyan in the shadows. And I like that because I felt like it was uniting. This is more or less the type of feel you probably would have gotten if you used gels a little bit more successfully, adding some color to the shadows, uniting the colors, having blue or a teal or cyan. So that's why I went ahead and added that color grade to the shadows. But then I still felt like I was looking a lot at her arm, and the face was just really getting neglected. So what I did is with curves, I brightened up her face a little bit, added more contrast just to direct the eye there. And you could go in and you could pale out her skin more if that's what you wanted. But my point is, I think this was probably closer to the colors you were trying to achieve and where you wanted to direct the eye. So just be careful about placement of light. All right, next up, I love this effect. This effect is by using 3 lights, each with a different gel. Typically, you go with an RGB, red, green, and blue on each different light. I talk about this in my Magic of Gels tutorial. I take you through this. And I always like this, and this is well executed because the light on her face really is white. If you do this wrong, there'll be a weird color cast to her face and her skin if it's not balanced correctly. So well done on that. And I like that the pose has an interesting shape so that you actually see the shape in the shadows. All of that works for me. What I think doesn't quite hit the mark personally is the styling. I look really at 2 places. I look at the hat because it's such a bright, saturated area, and then I look at her jeans because they are lighter in tone. It tends to drag me away from her face. So I think I would consider, what are you trying to convey about this subject? If the hat is actually important, like it is her favorite team and this shot is a high school senior portrait and she needed to have that in here, then leave it. If not, I don't know if I'd pick that color or something with a logo. And then the same thing with the jeans. I just think that my eye gets drawn there unnecessarily. So everything works for me except for the styling, unless there is a reason that these were chosen, like very specific, like it is important to the character you're trying to portray, which of course I don't know who this character is, but ideally as a viewer, even without knowing, I should be able to get a feel for it, and I just don't quite get it there. Really well done on the lighting and the posing. Okay, next up. So this photographer submitted 2 photos in this layout, and of the 2, well, first of all, let me just say the colors that were chosen here, the kind of this mauve and this teal, are just stunning. I love the color combination. So bravo on that. I love it. I think the lighting's beautiful. As far as the quality of light, it's quite flattering. And I also really like the retouching. So all of those things, awesome. As I compare the 2, I like the picture on the left better personally. I like her peeking through the fingers because the fingers are supposed to be a center of interest here. They are supposed to be interesting. I think I don't like the expression quite as much over here on the right hand side. It's not bad. I just don't like it as much. The one thing I did find slightly problematic though for the picture on the left is that I felt like the light, your main light, was pointed here, kind of at her 2 fingers on this side and the ear. So yes, you have that teal filling in the shadows. That's nice. I personally would have brightened it up a little bit on that side as well. But the main light was just not quite hitting the mark. Ideally, I want it over on this finger and her eye, but it's mispointed. So ideally, you get that fixed in camera. But what I did is I used some curves to kind of shift the light a little bit. So if you could get it in camera to look a little bit more like that, where you bring the attention to the eye, downplay the ear, I think that would be a little bit more successful. That being said, you look over here on the right hand side, the light on her face is very flattering here, but the pose is just more mysterious on this side. So you pick or choose, it's personal preference, but I like that this was trying something a little bit different, something unexpected. In this photograph, you know that the photographer knows how to light, for sure. The red rim light over here on the left-hand side is perfectly raking across the body. Same thing with the yellow. It's perfectly highlighting the musculature of the subject. And then there's a top-down blue-ish light that is sculpting the form from the top. So all of those things work together really well. I like the colors. I'm not exactly sure what you're trying to say with your color choices. Maybe look at a color wheel to help you pick them. Do you want something that's more analogous, all the same colors? Do you want them to pop? Maybe the blue should be more saturated if it's all about color. I'm not sure. They work for sure. I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm just not exactly sure what you were trying to say with the color. There's only actually one thing that I find to critique strongly in this photo, and it's those underwear. I cannot help but look at these stripes over and over and over and over again. And your eye is drawn to faces and saturation and areas of contrast, but you also can't help but read words. So if the underwear brand is important for some reason, like it's an ad for them or they're a sponsor, then leave the words. If not, I'd get rid of it. But regardless, you got to get rid of these stripes because that's where my eye's going. So notice I just kind of painted black over it. But if you look away from the image and look back, notice how much longer your eye stays on the face and the body and you don't get drawn to the underwear. But when I turn that off, I feel like that's like the second place you look. You look face, underwear, then body. So I would just be careful with that particular styling element and make a decision whether it really is important or if you can cut it out because it leaves more attention to be drawn to the subject and to your beautiful, beautiful lighting. Thank you again, everybody, so much for joining me. And I really truly believe that critique is extremely important to understanding the areas that you can grow in your photograph. So thanks for joining me and stay tuned. There's going to be a lot more of these critiques in the future. See you next time.